Hi, this is Dave with Market Trading Concepts, closing out the week for Friday, July the 6th, 2012. Let's start off by taking a quick look at the stock index futures, specifically the Dow Futures. And we're looking at the daily chart of the Dow. And basically what I'm looking at here is we had resistance up above here, just above 12,800 on the Dow Futures. We tested it for many days in here, and we couldn't get through it initially, so we pulled back down to the 21 period moving average. So this is, I think, pretty normal. This is pretty normal action that you find when you hit a major resistance level, which this was around 12,800, and then pulling back down into support. So this isn't uncommon. Now what we're looking at then moving forward is we're looking at this trend line. I'm looking at this trend line here. I've got 2 points, which I think makes sense in from a sustainable angle. You've got about I'm going to call it a 45-degree sustainable uptrend angle here, which I like to see. And you have a market structure in place now where you have a low, and then you have a higher high, and you have a higher low here at this point, and now you're set to put in another higher low. So what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this 21 EMA to hold, this 21 EMA for a higher low structure, or I'm looking at this trend line to hold. So somewhere in, I'm going to call it this zone. Somewhere in this zone, I'm looking for that to hold and potentially to move higher. So as long as we maintain this structure of support or support here somewhere in this zone, then I am a net bull on the market. I'm net bullish on the market, so on the stock indices in general. So basically, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this to hold. Initially, we had weakness on Friday, and we pushed into this level, and you can see that we initially held that level there on the daily chart at the 21 EMA. So now, what am I looking for going into next week? Well, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, this is not trading advice. What I'm looking at is I'm looking at the holding of this level and potentially pushing higher, set to put in a higher high. Now, ultimately, I'd be looking for a test of these highs somewhere up and around this level, and then we'll see. What I'm actually looking for is to see if we're going to hit these highs, and if we do, if we initially pull back, if we're going to push through those highs. But at this point in time, I think that's going out a little bit too far. In this market environment, you really have to go on a day-by-day basis and maybe a 3 to 5 day outlook, in my opinion. I'm looking usually 3 to 5 days out to see what will happen. So initially, I'm a bull if we hold this level, if we hold this trend line. If we decisively break this level, or we decisively break this trend line, and by decisively I mean, a solid 1 or 2 day close below it, preferably a 2 day close below it, that's what really would change my mind from a bullish perspective to a bearish perspective. So I'm really a cautious bull, strictly because I think we have a market structure in place here now, which is set to potentially test this trend line, or hold, where we closed Friday and potentially push higher. So that's kind of what I'm looking for to happen. That's kind of what I'm expecting to have happen, and what would change my mind, as mentioned, if we get a decisive close of this level, 21 EMA, or a decisive close below this trend line. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Let's take a look at some of the other charts to see if they look the same. But before we do, I just wanted to mention here, I'm also a bull because we're holding in and above this 61.8% retracement of this high to this low, and from this low to this high here we held this 50% retracement. So in fact, In fact, what I'm going to do is this level is no longer in play. These retracement levels, so I am going to, I am going to delete them from the chart just to clean it up a little bit more. I'm going to keep these fibs on the chart and these levels on here because I think these are, these are the key levels here. And this is a key level here that we're holding above the 61.8% retracement of this high to that low. Okay, let's take a look at the Dow Futures and the other stock index futures from the daily Darvis squeeze perspective. I'm just going to look at the the daily charts, and it looks like my platform is a little bit slow here right now. So let's see if I can expand out this chart. Okay. Okay, so let's expand out this chart. Okay, I just gave it a quick pause there because it was hanging. But basically, so here's the Darvis squeeze. We don't have any fresh setups, but what I do notice here is the MACD is crossed above its zero line, which is bullish, and the trending indicator is bullish. So taking a look at the market from this perspective, the Dow looks more bullish to me than it does bearish. So if we take a look then at the S&P future, let's take a look at the daily chart on the S&P future and expand that out. Hopefully it'll load a little bit quicker this time. Here we go. So what we have here is pretty much the same situation, and the MACD as well is crossing above its zero line, and this looks intermediate bullish. So we have kind of the same situation in play on the S&P futures. Let's take a look at the Nasdaq futures. See, we don't have any fresh Darvis squeeze signals, but I just want to see where they are. Okay, so this looks exactly the same here. So looking at the sister indexes, you basically have the same situation here on the trending indicator and on the MACD crossing over the zero line. This looks very much the same, looks very similar. So I believe all the sister indexes are looking like they're pretty much paddling in the boat in the same direction. So let's take a look at the transports from a Dow theory perspective, and the Dow the transports on the daily chart seem to be holding above support at the 8 EMA, and they're holding above the 21 EMA. Let me just expand it out quickly. The MACD, this is the MACD here, same situation, crossing above the zero line. The trending indicator, although this indicator looks kind of sideways, it is now in more of a bullish phase than a bearish phase. So we're not getting a lot of heads up from the transports, but we are getting kind of a collaboration that they're moving in the same direction. So let's take a look at then the VIX index quickly. Let's see here, the VIX on the daily chart, and it looks pretty much the same as it did last week. It has the potential to go lower, to push lower, which would bode well for higher stock market prices. And you can see here that it is moving inverse. The MACD is below the zero line, and it is traveling in a lower direction, and the trend indicator is pushing lower. So this would really bode well for higher stock market prices, because the VIX moves inverse of the stock index, the stock indexes in general, stock indices. So I think this is pretty much, I don't see any real divergences here. I don't see anything telling me that, hey, this doesn't look right. So I think I'm basically more bullish on the stock indexes, on the stock indices, than I am bearish. So I'm a cautious bull still. Now let's kind of switch gears here and take a look at the dollar index. So the dollar index on the daily chart, you can see here from my radar screen, fired a long Darvish squeeze breakout 1 bar ago on the daily chart. So let's expand the daily chart out and see what that looks like. Okay, so here you have a couple of things in play. You have the dollar index pushing higher towards these highs. You can see the resistance at those highs, those intermediate highs. You've got somewhat of a minor downtrend line there. Let me draw that a little bit cleaner. So you've got somewhat of a minor downtrend line there. So let's go from this high to these highs, intermediate highs. And what you can see happening there, I kind of like this action, because what this looks like to me is you're basically in more of an uptrend. Here you had a sideways consolidation, you broke into an uptrend, and then you had a pullback with a minor downtrend. Then you broke this downtrend. Let me just grab the pen. You broke this minor downtrend here, and then you came back and tested the trend there. But effectively what you've done here is you've changed from a minor downtrend market structure into, you broke this trend line, you came down, you put in what looks like to me like a higher low when you tested this trend line, and now you're set to put in a higher high in here. So from a market structure perspective, and how I define basic trend, I like this. This looks higher, and then now you have a Darvish squeeze signal firing off at the breakout of this box. So, excuse me. So there's a little bit of divergence in my mind here, because I'm looking at potentially higher prices in the stock index futures, but the dollar index looks like it wants to go higher. So now we have a situation where maybe we either have a divergence happening, because in my mind I'm looking at, if the dollar index goes higher, stock indexes are going to go lower. If the stock indexes, and vice versa, if the stock indexes go higher, the dollar index you would expect to go lower. So that to me is a bit of a divergence. Although that said, we had a down day in the stock indexes on Friday, where we pulled back to support there, and this broke out to new intermediate highs, although it's just testing these highs. So looking at that, they either need to resolve themselves one way or the other, or we could be looking at a potential decoupling, where their market forces may be pushing one market higher versus the other, and we just have a general decoupling of the correlating relationship between the two. So correlations do come and go, as you'll often hear, and we could have a situation where the correlations are no longer correlated, or we could have something more significant happening where one is going to win out over the other. At this point in time, I don't really know. I don't really have an opinion on it. But what I do know is this is, until proven otherwise, a valid Darvish squeeze long signal. So I'm looking at, it, if it can get through this resistance here, then the dollar index could be going higher, which would bode not well for the euro. So we have another situation here where this is sort of testing the trend line, or the zero line rather, on the MACD. But what you do have here is you see that you're pushing to new highs, and you have kind of a divergence in the trending indicator. So you've got a bit of a divergence here, where you're kind of pushing to higher highs here in the price action, but the momentum of the trending indicator is going lower. So that's a bit of a divergence. That might be a bit of a heads up as to something not being right there. But at this point in time, it's still early. I'm just noting the divergence here. And I'll just have to keep an eye on that and see how that kind of plays out. So let's take a look now at the Let's take a look now at the euro and see what the euro chart looks like, and then we'll wrap up this video. I'm not going to get into too many other markets, although I will switch from markets from time to time. But I think this is kind of what I've been watching recently. I've been watching, the stock indices, and I've been watching, what the dollar index is doing versus, the euro, to see, if that's going to give us a broader indication of what's going on in the major markets. I'm not really watching too closely, although I am, reviewing the markets on a day-to-day basis, but I'm not really watching too closely the bonds right now, or some of the other markets. So I'm just focusing on these markets at the time, for the time being, and I will kind of jump back and forth from time to time. So that said, let's take a look here at the euro then. So as you would expect, the dollar index had a Darvis squeeze long. The euro just fired a Darvis squeeze short on the daily chart. And you can also see that you've got a bit of a divergence going on here too. So you've got, lower prices in the euro, so new intermediate lows, and you've got kind of higher highs, or I'm sorry, higher lows in the trending indicator here. So you can see a bit of a divergence happening from this point here, okay, versus, these points here. So that's kind of got my attention. That said, price is going to go where it wants to go, and this is, until proven otherwise, a valid Darvis squeeze short signal in the euro. So that's kind of all I have for the markets this week, and I hope it helps for what it's worth. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you at an upcoming meetup or at the next video update. Until then, be well and good trading.